Hello. I never thought I'd be back here sharing my story. But life has a way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect it. 5 years ago, I went through one of the most devastating experiences of my life. My wife, Lucy, betrayed me in a way I never saw coming. She left me for another man, a married man named Mike of all people. I thought I'd put that chapter behind me, but just yesterday, I received a phone call that reopened old wounds. It was Lucy. And the cryptic message she left has sent me spiraling back into a world I thought I'd escaped. Before I get into what happened, let me take you back to where it all began. Back then, Lucy and I were married for 7 years. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had our ups and downs, but I believed we were solid. That all changed when Mike entered the picture. He was a colleague of hers, someone she met at a conference. I remember her coming home that night, excitedly talking about how she had networked with brilliant minds in her field. Mike's name came up a few times, but I didn't think much of it. Over the next few months, subtle changes in Lucy's behavior started to surface. She'd stay late at work more often, citing urgent projects and tight deadlines. When she was home, she was glued to her phone, constantly texting. She'd laugh at messages and then quickly put her phone away whenever I entered the room. My gut told me something was off, but I pushed it aside, not wanting to be the paranoid husband. But as the months went on, the tension grew unbearable. One evening, after another late night at the office, she walked in, and I couldn't keep my suspicions bottled up any longer. I confronted her, and what followed was a tear-filled argument. She didn't deny it. She admitted she was seeing someone else, someone who made her feel alive again. When I asked who, the name Mike slipped out of her mouth like venom. She didn't try to sugarcoat it. She told me she was in love with him and wanted to be with him, even if it meant ending our marriage. The divorce was ugly. Lucy moved out and shacked up with Mike almost immediately. I found out later that Mike was also married with 2 kids. It seemed that he, too, was willing to blow up his entire life for Lucy. The betrayal hit me hard. I didn't just lose my wife, I lost my faith in people. But with time, I tried to rebuild myself, piece by piece. For the past 5 years, I've managed to put some semblance of a life back together. I found a new job in a different city, made new friends, and even started casually dating again. I thought I was finally free from the shadow of that toxic relationship. That is, until yesterday. I was going through my regular Monday morning routine when I saw a missed call on my phone. A number I didn't recognize. Curious, I listened to the voicemail. The moment I heard her voice, my heart stopped. It was Lucy. "Hey, it's Lucy. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me back." That was it. No explanation, no details, just her voice, trembling with urgency. I didn't call her back. Instead, I spent the entire day wondering what the hell she could possibly want after all this time. Had something happened to Mike? Had she realized her mistake? Or was this some twisted game she wanted to play? I couldn't figure it out, and it's been eating at me ever since. Against my better judgment, I decided to dig into her life a bit. I needed to know what she'd been up to. I still had some contacts in the city where we used to live, so I reached out. What I found out shocked me. It turns out that Lucy and Mike's whirlwind romance hadn't ended with a happily ever after. In fact, their relationship had imploded about 2 years ago. Mike's wife, after finding out about their affair, had gone scorched earth on him. Not only did she take full custody of their kids, but she'd also managed to take him to the cleaners in court, leaving him nearly bankrupt. After the dust settled, Mike's perfect image was shattered, and he turned into a bitter, broken man. Rumors floated around that he'd become aggressive and unstable, and that Lucy had finally left him when things got too rough. But why would she be calling me now? And what could she possibly want? I'm torn between ignoring her completely and satisfying my morbid curiosity. Part of me wants to know what's so important that she'd break her silence after all these years. But another part of me knows that reopening this wound could be disastrous. Yet, here I am, staring at my phone, debating if I should call her back. This is where I need your advice. Reddit. What would you do? Should I call her and see what she wants? Or should I block her number and move on? Something tells me there's more to this story than meets the eye. So I did it. I called Lucy back. My curiosity got the best of me, and I couldn't resist. When she picked up, there was a long pause on the other end. It was as if she didn't expect me to actually return her call. "I didn't think you'd call," she said softly. Her voice sounded different, fragile. "What do you want, Lucy?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. "It's about Mike," she said. "He's gone." Gone? What did she mean, gone? My mind raced with possibilities. Had he skipped town? Had he gotten into some kind of trouble? But then she clarified. "He's dead," she whispered. I was stunned. Of all the things I'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. Mike was dead? What happened? I managed to ask. Lucy's voice trembled as she explained. Apparently, Mike had died under suspicious circumstances just a week ago. The police were investigating, but they hadn't ruled out foul play. "I need your help," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My ex-wife, the woman who had shattered my life, was asking me for help with what? A murder investigation? It was absurd. "Why would I help you?" I asked coldly. She took a deep breath, and what she said next sent chills down my spine. "Because they think I did it." I had to sit down. This was insane. Lucy, a suspect in a murder investigation? The woman who cheated on me, left me for another man, and disappeared from my life, now wanted me to swoop in and save her? But the worst part was, I could hear the fear in her voice. She was genuinely terrified. I was torn. Part of me wanted to hang up and let her deal with her mess. But another part, the part that used to love her, that still felt some twisted sense of responsibility for her, couldn't just walk away. So I made a decision I'm not sure I'll ever understand. I agreed to meet with her. I know what you're thinking. I must be out of my mind for getting involved in this mess. Maybe I am. But curiosity and that old sense of obligation drove me to meet Lucy. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a place where neither of us would be recognized. As soon as I walked in, I spotted her sitting in a corner booth, nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup. She looked different, older. There were bags under her eyes, and she seemed almost hollow. This wasn't the confident, vibrant woman I once knew. As I sat down across from her, she glanced up, her eyes wide and searching. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "Let's get one thing straight," I said, leaning forward. "I'm not here because I want to help you. I'm here to find out why, after 5 years, you decided to drag me into your mess." Lucy swallowed hard and nodded. "Fair enough. But you're the only one I can trust. I'm being set up, and I don't know who else to turn to." I almost laughed. "Trust? After what you did to me, you think I'd trust you?" She looked down at her hands, and for a moment, I thought she was going to start crying. But then she took a deep breath and straightened up, meeting my gaze head-on. "I know I hurt you, and I know I'm the last person you want to see. But I didn't kill Mike, and I need someone who can look at this without thinking I'm guilty from the start." I sighed. "Start talking then. What happened?" She launched into her story. According to Lucy, she and Mike had broken up about 2 years ago, shortly after his life fell apart. His wife had completely destroyed him in court, and Mike had become bitter and unpredictable. They fought constantly, and it got to the point where Lucy feared for her safety. So, she left. For a while, she tried to rebuild her life, distancing herself from him and their disastrous affair. But then, a few weeks ago, Mike reached out to her. He begged her to meet, saying he needed to talk. Against her better judgment, she agreed. "He looked terrible," she said, shivering at the memory. "He'd lost weight, his hair was a mess, and he was paranoid. Kept talking about people following him and how his life was in danger." Lucy tried to brush it off, assuming it was just more of his drama. But then Mike said something that caught her attention. He claimed he had evidence that could destroy several powerful people. People who wouldn't hesitate to kill to keep their secrets hidden. He wouldn't tell me what it was, but he said he needed my help to keep it safe. I shook my head in disbelief. "So you're telling me Mike got mixed up in something shady, and now he's dead. What does that have to do with you? Her hands trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive, sliding it across the table. This. He mailed it to me 2 days before he died, with a note that said, "If something happens to me, they'll come for you next." I stared at the drive, then back at her. "And you haven't gone to the police because? Because I don't know what's on it," she whispered. "And I'm scared." When the cops came to question me, they seemed convinced I was involved. They think I killed him for whatever's on that drive. But I swear, I didn't even know it existed until I got it in the mail. I picked up the drive, weighing it in my hand. If Lucy was telling the truth, then Mike had indeed stumbled onto something dangerous. But why drag her into it? And more importantly, why involve me? Did Mike mention any names? Anyone he was afraid of? I asked. She shook her head. No, but he kept saying they a lot. He was terrified, paranoid. And now, her voice broke, and she looked around the cafe, as if expecting someone to be watching us. Now I feel like I'm being watched too. I sighed deeply, feeling the old bitterness rising up. This was exactly the kind of chaos I'd spent the last 5 years trying to escape. But as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me couldn't just walk away. I needed to know what was on that drive. Maybe it was just nonsense, the ravings of a broken man. Or maybe, just maybe, Mike had really uncovered something big. "All right," I said slowly. "I'll take a look. But if I find out you're lying, Lucy, I'm done. Understand?" She nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. "Thank you. I promise. I'm telling the truth." I pocketed the drive and stood up. "One last question. Who else knows you have this?" "No one," she said quietly. "But I think they're watching me. I think they've been waiting for me to do something with it." Great. Just what I needed. A bunch of faceless, potentially dangerous people lurking in the shadows. As I left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something much bigger than I realized. That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop and held my breath. A single folder appeared on the screen, labeled Pandora. Inside, there were dozens of encrypted files. No names, no clear indications of what they contained. But there was one document that wasn't locked. A simple text file titled, "Read under first." I opened it, and my blood ran cold as I read the single line of text inside. "If you're reading this, you're already in danger." My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. What the hell had Mike gotten himself, and now me, into? And why did I get the sinking feeling that Lucy's fear was only the beginning? The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. Whatever Mike had been tangled up in, it was serious enough to get him killed. And now, by just opening that drive, I'd officially crossed the line from bystander to participant. I took a deep breath and closed the text file. The words, "You're already in danger," echoing in my mind. I knew I had to tread carefully. If these people really were watching Lucy, and possibly me, one wrong move could put us both in their crosshairs. I scoured through the rest of the files, each one encrypted and inaccessible without the proper key. But there was one more file I could open, tucked away in the depths of the folder. It was a video file labeled proof.mp4. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Whatever was on this video, it might be the only clue I had. I clicked on it, half expecting a blank screen or some mundane clip that wouldn't make sense out of context. But as the video started, the scene it depicted made my heart pound. The camera was set up in what looked like an upscale office. I could see polished wooden bookshelves, expensive paintings on the wall, and a large mahogany desk in the center of the room. 2 men stood by the desk, arguing heatedly. One of them was Mike, disheveled, agitated, and clearly desperate. The other man, dressed in a tailored suit and exuding an air of authority, I didn't recognize. Their voices were muffled, but as the argument escalated, I caught a few words here and there. "Exposing, ruin everything. You can't back out now." Mike shook his head violently, pointing a finger at the suited man. Then, abruptly, he pulled out a small object, the flash drive, and held it up. The suited man went pale, his expression shifting from anger to something colder, more dangerous. He stepped closer to Mike, And though I couldn't hear his words, the message was clear. He was issuing a threat. Mike seemed to waver, clutching the drive protectively. But then the suited man said something that made him freeze. "Think of Lucy." My blood ran cold as I watched Mike's reaction. His face crumpled, shoulders slumping in defeat. He took a step back, shaking his head slowly. The suited man reached out, his expression almost sympathetic, and placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. Then, without warning, he struck. The movement was so sudden, so vicious, that I almost missed it. The suited man pulled out a small syringe and jabbed it into Mike's neck. Mike gasped, his hand flying up to the spot as his body convulsed. He staggered backward, clutching the desk for support. But within seconds, he crumpled to the ground, unmoving. The suited man calmly pocketed the syringe, adjusted his jacket, and glanced down at Mike's lifeless body with a look of cold satisfaction. Then he turned to the camera, his gaze locking onto the lens, as if he knew exactly where it was. "You should have stayed quiet, Mike," he murmured, his voice low and menacing. "Now I have to deal with this inconvenience." He walked out of the frame, leaving Mike's body sprawled on the floor. The video ended there, the screen going black. I sat back, my heart racing. This wasn't just some affair gone wrong. Mike had been murdered, and the man responsible had done it without a second thought. But the worst part? He knew about Lucy. He'd used her to control Mike, to keep him in line. And now that Mike was dead, Lucy was the next loose end. My mind raced as I replayed the scene over and over. Who was the man in the suit? What exactly was on that drive that made him kill Mike so ruthlessly? And more importantly, why did he look so damn familiar? Then it hit me. I'd seen him before, in the background of photos, shaking hands with politicians, standing beside CEOs at press conferences. This wasn't just some random businessman. He was someone powerful, connected, and dangerous. I didn't know his name, but I knew enough to realize that crossing him would be a death sentence. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Lucy had been right to be scared. If this guy knew she had the drive, it was only a matter of time before he came for her. And if he found out I was involved, I'd be next. I needed to move fast. I copied the entire drive onto a separate USB stick and hid it in my safe. Then I deleted all traces of the files from my laptop, leaving only the original drive intact. There was no way I was going to confront this guy head-on, but maybe, just maybe, I could find out more about him without drawing attention to myself. The next day, I reached out to an old friend from my investigative days, someone who specialized in digging up dirt on powerful people. I didn't give her the full story, just asked her to look into the man's identity and any potential connections he might have to Mike. She agreed, though not without some skepticism. "This sounds messy," she warned. "If he's as high profile as you say, poking around in his affairs could get you killed." "Just be discreet," I said. "I'll owe you one." The following days were a blur of tension and paranoia. I felt like I was being watched every time I left the house. I started taking different routes home, keeping an eye out for suspicious cars or strangers lingering on the streets. But nothing happened. No mysterious threats, no break-ins, no shadowy figures following me. Until one morning, when I received a single text message from an unknown number. "Stay out of this or Lucy dies." The words made my blood turn to ice. They knew. Somehow they knew I was involved. And now they were threatening her life. I felt a surge of rage, a dark, vengeful urge to strike back. But I couldn't act impulsively. Not when Lucy's life was hanging by a thread. I texted her immediately, warning her to get out of town. But she didn't respond. Panic surged through me as I dialed her number, the phone ringing endlessly before going to voicemail. Where was she? Had they already gotten to her? With my heart in my throat, I grabbed my keys and headed out, praying that I wasn't already too late. Lucy might not deserve my help, but I wasn't going to let her die because of my involvement. Not if I could help it. But as I sped toward her apartment, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. This was only the beginning. I was up against forces I didn't fully understand, and one wrong move could cost both of us our lives. I had to be smart. I had to be careful. And I had to figure out what the hell was on that drive before it was too late. I reached Lucy's apartment in record time, my tires screeching as I pulled into the parking lot. The building looked quiet, normal even, but I knew better than to trust appearances. My mind raced through 100 scenarios, each worse than the last. Was she already gone? Had they come for her? Or was she lying low, terrified, and waiting for me to show up? I pounded on the door, glancing around the dimly lit hallway for any sign of movement. No response. I knocked again, harder this time, and shouted, "Lucy, it's me. Open up." For a moment, the silence stretched unbearably. Then, I heard a soft click, followed by the sound of a chain sliding back. The door opened just a crack, revealing Lucy's face, pale, eyes wide with fear. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by urgency. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low. "Now." She hesitated, glancing nervously over her shoulder before stepping aside to let me in. I entered, scanning the room for anything out of place. It was small, sparsely furnished, and looked like she'd been living out of boxes. Had she been planning to leave town? There were bags packed by the door, a half-empty suitcase on the couch. Lucy closed the door behind me and turned the deadbolt. "What's going on?" she whispered. "Why are you here?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because I know about Mike. I know he was murdered." Her eyes widened in shock. She staggered back, hand flying to her mouth. "What? How?" "Save it," I interrupted. "I saw the video. I know he was involved in something dangerous. And I know that drive you sent me is the key to all of it." For a moment, Lucy just stared at me, her expression a mix of terror and disbelief. Then, slowly, she sank down onto the couch, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had finally crushed her. "I didn't know who else to turn to," she murmured. "After everything that happened between us, I thought you wouldn't care." I clenched my fists, fighting back the anger bubbling up inside me. "What did you think would happen, Lucy? That I'd see what's on that drive and just walk away?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't think they'd come after you. I thought if I sent it to you, they wouldn't think to look for it here." "Who are they?" I demanded, leaning forward. "Who killed Mike? And why?" Lucy looked away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know all the details. Mike, he never told me everything. Just that he'd gotten in over his head. That there were powerful people involved. He said it had to do with money, lots of money being funneled through fake companies. Laundering, maybe, or something worse. But he was going to expose them." "Expose them how?" "By collecting evidence," she whispered. "Everything he could find, he put on that drive. Names, dates, bank transactions. He thought it would be enough to take them down. But it wasn't, was it?" She shook her head slowly. "No, they found out. And when they did, they used me to control him. They threatened to kill me if he went public. So he backed off. He tried to disappear." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Disappear? By sending you into hiding?" "Yes," she said softly. "He told me to cut off all ties, to never contact anyone. Not even you. And I did for a while. But after he died, I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. Then I started getting messages. From him." I blinked, taken aback. "From Mike? After he was dead?" Lucy nodded, her face pale. "I don't know how. Maybe he scheduled them before it happened. But he kept sending me instructions. Go here. Get this. Hide it. He told me to send you that drive. He said it would keep me safe." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process it all. "So you sent it to me, hoping I'd figure it out?" "Yes," she said, looking down at her hands. "I know it was selfish. I didn't want to die, okay?" Her voice broke, and I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe, deep down. As much as I hated her for what she'd done to our marriage, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was genuinely scared. And now, because of that damn drive, I was in this mess too. "Listen," I said, keeping my voice steady. "They sent me a message today. They know I'm involved. They threatened to kill you." Lucy's head snapped up, her eyes wide. What? They said if I didn't back off, you'd die. I took a step closer, leaning down to meet her gaze. So I need to know everything, Lucy. If I'm going to get us out of this, I need to know what we're up against. She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Okay, I'll tell you what I know. But you have to promise me something. What? If something happens to me, you have to destroy the drive. Don't let it fall into their hands. Please. I hesitated, then nodded. I promise. For the next hour, Lucy told me everything she could remember. Names, places, fragments of conversations she'd overheard. It wasn't much, but it was enough to paint a picture. This wasn't just about laundering money. It was about silencing anyone who got too close to the truth. Mike had been one of many people who tried to expose them, and he'd paid the price. And now it seemed I was on their radar too. I need to get you somewhere safe, I said finally, standing up. If they know where you are, we don't have much time. But where can I go? She asked, her voice trembling. They have eyes everywhere. I have a few places in mind, I said. But first, we're going to make sure they think you're dead. What? She gasped, staring at me in horror. You want to fake my death? It's the only way, I said firmly. If they think you're out of the picture, they'll focus on me. And that'll buy us time. She looked at me, fear and desperation warring in her eyes. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, what do we do? I took a deep breath, already formulating a plan in my mind. It was risky, borderline insane, but if it worked, it might just save her life. Leave that to me, I said grimly. But once we start, there's no going back. We didn't waste any time. I knew that the longer we stayed in that apartment, the greater the risk. Lucy's life was hanging by a thread, and with every passing second, the noose was tightening. I grabbed her bags and shoved a few essential items in them. Clothes, cash, anything she could carry easily. Meanwhile, I was already running through the steps in my mind, piecing together a plan that would hopefully make it look like she had met a tragic end. First things first, I said, glancing out the window to ensure we were still alone. We need a distraction. Something big enough to make them believe you're gone for good. Lucy's eyes widened. Like what? An explosion, I replied without hesitation. If we're going to sell this, we need something dramatic. I watched as her face paled even more. An explosion? Are you serious? Deadly serious, I said. If they think you died in an accident or were killed by them, they'll back off. At least long enough for us to get you out of here. But how? She whispered, glancing around the small apartment. You can't just. I can and I will, I interrupted. I've got some contacts, people who owe me favors. They'll help us stage this. But you have to trust me. For a moment, Lucy just stared at me, her expression a mix of fear and disbelief. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, do whatever you have to do. With that, I made a few quick calls. My contacts weren't exactly what you'd call law-abiding citizens. But in situations like this, that was an advantage. I spoke in code, giving them just enough information to understand what I needed and what was at stake. By the time I hung up, I had everything arranged. Grab whatever you need, I told Lucy. We're leaving in 5. She nodded silently, her hands trembling as she packed the last few items into her bags. I glanced at my watch, my pulse racing. We didn't have much time. When we left the apartment, I made sure to leave no trace behind. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could link us back here. Then we headed out the back, sticking to the shadows. My contact would be arriving any minute, and I needed to make sure we weren't spotted before then. As we waited in the alley, I kept a close eye on the street. It was late, but you could never be too careful. If they were watching, we'd have one shot to pull this off. Just one. Here, I murmured, handing Lucy a disposable phone. This is how I'll contact you. Keep it off until you're safe. And whatever you do, don't call anyone else. She took it, her fingers trembling. What about you? I'll be fine, I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. I'm the one they'll be looking for now. Before she could respond, A dark van pulled up beside us, its headlights off. The driver's side door swung open, and a large man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek stepped out. He nodded to me, then glanced at Lucy. "This her?" I nodded. "Yeah. Take good care of her." The man grunted. "You got it. Everything's in place. We'll handle the accident." "You sure about this?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Just make it look convincing." He nodded again, then motioned for Lucy to follow him. She glanced back at me one last time, her eyes filled with fear and something else. Regret, maybe, but there was no time for goodbyes. "Go," I whispered. "I'll contact you when it's safe." And then she was gone, climbing into the van and disappearing into the darkness. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This was it. There was no turning back now. I watched as the van drove off, disappearing around the corner. Then I turned and walked away, pulling out my own phone as I went. Time to play my part. I called the second contact, a guy I knew through some less-than-legal channels. He specialized in making problems disappear, and tonight he was going to help me do just that. "Yeah," he answered gruffly. "It's me." "You ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "Positive," I said. "Make it big. Make it loud. I want them to see it from space." He chuckled darkly. "You got it, man. Give me 10 minutes. I hung up and took a deep breath. 10 minutes. That was all it would take to fake Lucy's death. I just had to make sure I wasn't anywhere near the blast when it happened. I headed to the edge of the building, ducking into a small alleyway where I had a clear view of Lucy's apartment. It felt surreal, standing there, knowing what was about to happen. But it was the only way. If she was going to survive, we had to erase her completely. I counted down the seconds in my head, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, right on cue, it happened. The explosion ripped through the night, shattering windows and sending a fireball into the sky. The shockwave hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking me back a step. I watched as flames engulfed the building, the roar of the fire filling the air. It was chaos, exactly what I needed. Sirens wailed in the distance, people shouting and running toward the scene. I slipped away before anyone could notice me, blending into the shadows. My job was done. By the time the authorities arrived, there would be nothing left but a charred husk of a building and a few unrecognizable remains. The explosion would be chalked up as an accident, a gas leak maybe. And Lucy would be dead, at least as far as they were concerned. But I knew better. She was out there somewhere, safe. For now. I made my way back to my car, my mind racing. Faking her death had been the easy part. Now came the hard part. Figuring out who was behind all this, and why they were so desperate to get their hands on that drive. I slid behind the wheel, taking a deep breath. I had my work cut out for me, but I wasn't going to stop until I had answers. And if that meant drawing the bastards out of hiding, well, I was more than ready to do just that. With one last look at the burning building in the rearview mirror, I started the engine and drove off into the night. The game was just beginning. The explosion made headlines the next morning. Every major news outlet was running stories about the tragic gas leak that claimed the life of a young woman in her mid-30s. Unidentified female victim, they said, as firefighters and investigators picked through the rubble of what used to be Lucy's apartment. It was perfect. I kept my distance, watching it all unfold from the safety of a rented motel room several miles away. I knew Lucy would be doing the same, or at least I hoped she was. My contact promised to get her to a safe house outside of the city, somewhere remote where no one would think to look. But until I got word from her, all I could do was wait and watch. It wasn't long before the media started speculating. Reporters were tossing around terms like suspicious circumstances and unknown cause of ignition, hinting that it might not have been an accident after all. But they didn't have any evidence. And with the place reduced to ash, they weren't likely to find any. I made sure of that. Still, I knew the people hunting Lucy would be more thorough than the authorities. They wouldn't be satisfied with headlines and conjecture. They'd want hard proof, something concrete to confirm she was out of the picture. That meant I didn't have much time. I needed to get to the bottom of this, and fast. I spent the next few days digging. I started with the hard drive, poring over the files Lucy had managed to copy before things went south. At first glance, it looked like a typical ledger, numbers, dates, transactions. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about money. It was about people. The files contained a list of names, dozens of them, alongside figures that didn't make any sense at first. But then I saw the headers: ransom paid, security deposit, threat eliminated. Each entry corresponded to a person, with a date and a dollar amount listed next to it. It was a hit list. Someone had been using this ledger to track payments for assassinations, blackmail, extortion. Whatever it was serious. And Lucy must have stumbled onto it by accident. But that begged the question, who were these people and why was someone willing to kill to keep this information buried? I scanned the names, my mind racing. None of them were familiar at first, just ordinary-sounding men and women. But as I cross-referenced the dates and amounts, a pattern began to emerge. Most of the names matched individuals who had recently died under mysterious circumstances. Suicides, car crashes, unsolved murders. It was a trail of bodies stretching back nearly a decade. And whoever was behind it had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. But Lucy's discovery had thrown a wrench into their plans. By copying the files, she'd created a liability, one they couldn't afford. That's why they came after her. Not because of the money, but because of what she knew. As I pieced it together, a name jumped out at me. A name I hadn't expected to see. Near the bottom of the list, written in neat, careful handwriting, was the one entry that made my blood run cold. Lucy Hayes, threat level critical. Next to it was a date, yesterday's date, and the amount listed was astronomical. Far more than the others. Whoever put this hit out was serious. They weren't just cleaning up loose ends. They were making an example out of her. Which meant I was running out of time. I clenched my fists, staring at that damn entry as if I could will it out of existence. How had Lucy gone from a mild-mannered accountant to the top of a professional hit list? And who the hell wanted her dead so badly they'd spend that kind of money? There was only one way to find out. I had to go back to the source. I needed to talk to the people Lucy used to work with, the ones who might have tipped her off in the first place. That meant heading back to the company where this nightmare started. Richmond Financials. It was risky, but I didn't have a choice. If I was going to keep Lucy safe, if I was going to end this once and for all, I needed to know what we were up against. So I grabbed my jacket, checked my sidearm, and made a few calls. It was time to pay a visit to some old friends. Richmond Financials was one of those faceless, corporate entities that prided itself on discretion. Tucked away in a sleek glass building in the heart of downtown, it looked like every other investment firm in the city. But behind its polished exterior, Richmond had a reputation for handling less-than-legal transactions. And if Lucy's files were anything to go by, they were into more than just money laundering. I arrived just before noon, blending in with the lunch crowd as I slipped through the front doors. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I strode past, making my way to the elevators. I knew my way around. I'd been here before, back when I first met Lucy. She'd been in accounts back then, bright-eyed and eager, unaware of the dark underbelly lurking beneath the surface. The firm had changed since then. Security was tighter, the atmosphere more tense. I scanned the area, noting the cameras the guards stationed at strategic points. Whoever was running the show now was taking no chances. Good. Neither was I. I headed to the third floor, where the more sensitive departments were housed. I knew exactly who I was looking for. Peter Kovacs, the head of risk management. He was the one who'd handled Lucy's termination when she left the company. And if anyone knew what she'd stumbled onto, it would be him. I found his office at the end of a long, carpeted hallway. The door was closed, but that didn't matter. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and knocked twice. "Come in," a gruff voice called. I pushed the door open, stepping inside. Kovacs was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a face like a bulldog. He looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone laced with annoyance. I smiled tightly. Yeah, I think you can. He didn't recognize me at first. But as I stepped closer, his expression shifted. Recognition flickered, followed by something else, fear. You, he breathed. What the hell are you doing here? I leaned forward, bracing my hands on his desk. We need to talk. About Lucy Hayes. The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, glancing around as if searching for a way out. Don't play dumb, Kovacs, I snapped. I know about the drive. I know about the files. And I know that you put a hit out on her. He froze, his eyes wide. I don't know what you think you know, he said slowly. But you're making a mistake. No, I growled, leaning in closer. The only mistake I made was letting you bastards get this far. Now you're going to tell me everything you know? Or I'll make sure Lucy's the least of your problems. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stared at me, the fear in his eyes growing with every passing second. For the first time, I realized just how deep this went, and just how dangerous it was. Kovacs's eyes darted around the room, his panic visible as he weighed his options. He was cornered, and he knew it. I leaned in, maintaining eye contact, not giving him the chance to escape, physically or mentally. I'm not here to play games, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You can either talk, or I'll make sure you wish you had. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he swallowed hard. Look, I can't tell you much. I'll be dead before you're out the door. That caught my attention. Whoever was pulling the strings here was powerful enough to have even someone like Kovacs shaking in his boots. But that fear would work in my favor. I just needed to push him over the edge. I don't care about your bosses, I growled, pressing down harder. All I want is to know why Lucy's on that list. Who ordered the hit? Kovacs hesitated, then glanced at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Finally, his shoulders slumped, and he looked back at me with a resigned expression. You don't get it, do you? He muttered. This isn't just about Lucy. It's about what she represents. What the hell does that mean? I snapped. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Lucy. She wasn't supposed to see those files. But when she did, she became a liability. A big one. Those names she found? They're not just random people. They're targets, assets. Politicians, CEOs, people in high places. People who have a vested interest in making sure their indiscretions remain buried. I frowned, processing his words. So, this is about blackmail? Extortion? Something like that, he admitted. Richmond handles sensitive information for a lot of high-profile clients. We keep tabs on them, make sure they stay in line. But if that data ever got out, it'd be a disaster. I finished, understanding dawning. People would be ruined, lives destroyed. Worse, he said quietly, there's more than just dirt in those files. There are agreements, proof of certain arrangements that could topple entire corporations, maybe even governments. Lucy stumbled onto it by accident, but once she had it, she became the biggest threat we've ever faced. I stared at him, stunned. I knew it was bad, but I hadn't realized just how deep it went. This wasn't just about protecting a few dirty secrets. This was about controlling power on a massive scale. And that's why they tried to kill her? I asked, my voice tight. Kovacs nodded. They had no choice. If that data got out, if even a fraction of those names were exposed, the fallout would be catastrophic. So who ordered the hit? I demanded. Who's behind all of this? Kovacs's eyes darted around again, his fear palpable. I can't say. I don't even know who it is exactly. Just a code name. They call him the broker. He's the one pulling the strings. The broker. The name sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard whispers of someone like that before, a shadowy figure rumored to be the go-to guy for high-stakes deals and clandestine operations. But I'd always thought it was just a myth, a boogeyman made up to scare people into keeping quiet. Apparently, I was wrong. What does the broker want with Lucy? I asked, forcing myself to stay calm. If they already have the files, why go after her? Kovacs shook his head. It's not about the files. It's about what she knows. If Lucy managed to copy the data, she might have seen patterns. Links between names, connections no one's supposed to know about. The kind of information that could unravel everything. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. If she talks, if she ever tells anyone what she saw, the whole thing comes crashing down. And believe me, they'll burn the world to the ground before they let that happen. I took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. This was bigger than anything I'd ever dealt with before. Bigger than Lucy. Bigger than me. We were up against an entire network of power and corruption, and they were willing to kill to keep their secrets safe. But I wasn't about to back down. Where's the broker? I asked, my voice hard. How do I find him? Kovacs laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. You don't. No one does. He finds you if he wants to. But there's a place. Club, downtown. They call it the Crossroads. That's where the big players meet. If you want answers, that's where you start. I nodded slowly, committing the name to memory. The Crossroads. It sounded like exactly the kind of place where a man like the broker would do business. Discreet, exclusive, dangerous. Thanks, I said quietly, straightening up. You just saved your own life. Kovacs looked at me with a strange expression, somewhere between relief and resignation. Maybe, he murmured. Or maybe I just signed my death warrant. Let's hope not, I replied, turning toward the door. For your sake. I left him there, hunched over his desk, staring blankly at the wall. I didn't have time to feel sorry for him. He was part of the machine, just another cog in the wheel that was grinding people like Lucy into the dirt. And I was going to tear it apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. But first, I had to find the broker. The Crossroads was exactly what I expected, opulent, exclusive, and crawling with the kind of people who wore power like a second skin. It was the kind of place where deals were made and broken over glasses of $1,000 scotch, where fortunes changed hands with a whispered word. And somewhere in the crowd, hidden among the movers and shakers, was my target. I made my way through the main floor, scanning the faces around me. Businessmen in tailored suits, socialites draped in jewels, a smattering of security guards lurking in the shadows. But no sign of the broker. Then I spotted him. He was standing by the bar, a tall man with a trim beard and sharp eyes. He looked ordinary at first glance, but there was something about the way people moved around him, the way they avoided getting too close, that set him apart. I approached cautiously, keeping my movements casual. As I drew closer, he turned, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that sent a jolt of recognition through me. Looking for someone? He asked, his voice smooth as silk. I stared at him, my heart racing. The broker. I found him. But the real question was, did he know I was coming? I held his gaze, steady and unwavering. This was the man behind all of it, the one who'd turned Lucy's life into a living hell and, by extension, mine. And yet, here he was, standing in front of me like he didn't have a care in the world. I had to be smart. One wrong move, one slip-up, and I'd lose him forever. I said evenly. But I think I just found him. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Careful now. You're venturing into dangerous territory. Most people don't look for me unless they're very desperate or very foolish. I took a step closer, making sure I didn't break eye contact. Or maybe I'm just someone with nothing left to lose. His smile widened, a flash of teeth that reminded me of a predator baring its fangs. Is that so? Well, if you're here to talk, let's do so somewhere a bit more private, shall we? He gestured toward a side door marked private. Two large, stern-looking men in suits flanked it, their gazes tracking me as I moved. I knew I was walking into a lion's den, but this was my shot. If I backed down now, I'd never get another chance. We stepped into a dimly lit room lined with plush chairs and a polished mahogany table. It was designed to look like a high-end meeting space, but I knew the walls were probably soundproofed, and I'd bet my life there were hidden cameras and recording devices everywhere. The broker took a seat at the head of the table, gesturing for me to sit across from him. I complied, settling into the chair but keeping my back straight, my senses alert. I needed to stay sharp. Now, he began, folding his hands in front of him. Why don't you tell me what's brought you here? And more importantly, why you think I'm the one you're looking for. I leaned forward, my gaze locked on his. Let's not play games. You're the one who's been pulling the strings. You're the reason Lucy had to run. You ordered the hit on her. His expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise? Amusement? It was hard to tell. You're very sure of yourself, he said slowly. But tell me, if that's true, why would I bother talking to you? Why not just make you disappear, like I've done with so many others? I shrugged, keeping my voice casual. Because you want to know what I know. And if you kill me now, you'll never find out. He raised an eyebrow. And what exactly do you know? Enough to bring this whole operation crashing down, I said flatly. Lucy's still alive. And if something happens to me, she has a dead man's switch that'll send everything she knows to every major news outlet in the country. That was a bluff. I didn't know if Lucy had set up anything like that. Hell, I wasn't even sure if she still had the files. But I needed to make him think she did. I needed him to believe that if he made a move against me, he'd lose everything. The broker studied me for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. Interesting, he murmured. So you're here to negotiate. What is it that you want? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I want Lucy safe. No more assassins, no more running. You leave her alone, and I'll make sure the files stay buried. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. You really think it's that simple? That I just walk away because you asked nicely? No, I admitted. But I think you're smart enough to know that if this goes public, you'll have a lot more to worry about than just one woman. People like you thrive in the shadows. You need secrecy to keep your business running. Without it, everything falls apart. His smile faded, replaced by a hard, calculating look. And if I don't agree, what then? I met his gaze head-on. Then I burn everything down. I go to the FBI, the press, anyone who'll listen. You can kill me, but you won't be able to kill the story. For a moment, I thought he might actually do it, that he might just reach across the table and strangle me right then and there. But then he sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. You're more trouble than you're worth, you know that? He muttered. But fine, I'll consider your offer. Consider, I repeated, my hands curling into fists. That's not good enough. Then perhaps you should be the one making concessions. He shot back, his voice sharp. This isn't a charity, detective. You're asking me to spare a woman who has the power to ruin me. That's not something I take lightly. What do you want, then? I demanded. What'll it take to end this? He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. I want to know where she is. Give me that and I'll call off the dogs. You have my word. My heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment of truth. If I gave him Lucy's location, he'd find a way to get to her, no matter what he promised. But if I didn't, there was no guarantee he'd let me walk out of here alive. I'm not telling you where she is, I said quietly. But I can tell you this. She's already put safeguards in place. If she disappears or if I disappear, those files go public. There's no stopping it. The broker's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with anger. For a second, I thought he might lose control. But then, slowly, he forced himself to relax, a mask of calm sliding back into place. Fine, he bit out. If that's the way you want to play it, I'll back off. For now. But understand this, if I even think you're trying to double-cross me, I'll make it my life's mission to hunt you both down. And when I find you, I'll make sure you wish you'd never crossed me. Noted, I said evenly. But if you're smart, you'll keep your word. He stared at me for a long moment, then stood abruptly, signaling that the conversation was over. Get out, he said coldly, before I change my mind. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd stared down the broker and lived to tell the tale. But as I stepped back out into the night, a cold sense of dread settled over me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The game had just begun. Bye-bye.